So again, thank you very much for being here tonight. We're very excited to kick off this workshop and to have all of you be present and participate. We are going to be broken down. I'll just go forward. This is the Seaport project, and we are here tonight to gather input and have a very interactive discussion with everyone and to inform you about our project. The project is currently in the design phase. We're just starting the schematic design phase rather. The public realm is still very much in the concept. And that's what we're here today, and Gonzalo will be presenting with me to discuss and to get input. So we'll give a brief presentation, and then we'll have a breakout session, and then come back and debrief. There are boards along the wall, and so if there's any questions after the presentation, there'll be people at the boards to answer, or we invite you to bring them to the breakout session and really be involved and interactive. This presentation is also being recorded and will be uploaded to our website. So with that, I introduce you again to the Seaport Coastal Resilience Project. We are located obviously in Lower Manhattan in the financial district, but more specifically in the South Street Seaport. You'll hear a lot today about the Seaport and how we're looking to protect it. And this just outlines where it is contextually in the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resilience, which is that it is very much an independent project. It is south of the BMCR and begins at the Brooklyn Bridge and takes us down to John Street along the waterfront and then goes inland. I'd like to emphasize that this is a funded project. It is in the design phase. We do have a brick grant to work with, and we are very much working with the FIDI team so that the two complement themselves, or each other rather. But this is an independent project and can stand alone to protect our seaport. So how we're getting there is the objective of the Seaport Coastal Project is to protect the seaport from tidal inundation and 2100 tidal inundation and the near-term storm surge. It will bring the elevation, which you can see at the waterfront is existing at 6 feet, and it will raise it up to 11. This will be done in a gradual and universal design way that is what we're going to be talking about and presenting to you tonight. The FIDI master plan complements this project and will come after. It abuts at the waterfront and will be outboard and will tackle the 2100 storm surge. So again, the seaport is for the tidal inundation of 2100, which we may see signs of as early as 2050. So why is the seaport being protected? It is a legacy to New York City. It is a unique character and a place that deserves to be protected. It is also a very low-lying area. One of the things you'll hear a lot tonight from myself and Gonzalo is that this is a very bathtub-affected area. There's a lot of flooding, as I'm sure you know, and it needs to be protected. So it does have some iconic features. We know that it was impacted by Sandy. We're very much aware, and we're leaning to protect what this neighborhood is and that it deserves to be. So in the front of our mind as we go through this design is that historic characteristic of this project, of the neighborhood, and really looking to have it inform our design and preserve and enhance the neighborhood. You'll hear from Gonzalo, and as you sit at the two tables, we have broken the project into inland and waterfront, with each having unique characteristics and things that preserve and drive the design, and that need to be constantly thought of and be informed to our design. So specifically in the historic street area, there's lots of materials that we're very much aware of that define the neighborhood, that need to be preserved. They need to be integrated into our design, and they need to be paid attention to so that we put back what is there and what makes this neighborhood so distinct and beautiful. So some of those are the cobble. We're very much aware that it is a landmark district. The cobble in itself is typically landmark, the bluestone. So these are materials that will be put back as best they can and reset as we go through this project. So again, the idea of the project is to protect the neighborhood, and we will do that through leaning on the materials that are there. Similarly, on the waterfront side, it is a maritime, it is very much a link into the city and has a lot of history that we want to preserve, but we also want to nod to as we go forward with our design and borrow from those materials, things that are familiar to that area, we're looking to incorporate and include. So this topography, as you're well aware, is very low. And this is the crux of our project, is that we have some areas that are as low as 4 feet, and we're looking to protect up to 11. So we do have quite the task in front of us, but we're led by great talent. So I'm going to hand it over to Gonzalo, who would take us through the rest of the project.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was a great introduction. First of all, there will be like 3 other components to the presentation. First, we want to tell you a little bit about how we go by the design process. And the good news about the design process is that we have done a lot of work to get to where we are today in terms of understanding where the alignment runs, where the infrastructure needs to be installed because of issues of subsurface conditions and issues of pedestrian and vehicular circulation, overhead passes. I think we've made a huge leap to at least identify the geography where we can actually play ideas of placemaking opportunities, how the public realm is actually going to respond to the infrastructure, which I think is where the fun part of the project is. So with that, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, to make it very easy for everybody to kind of follow along, because some of these projects can be a little bit complicated, we've decided to kind of divide the project into 2 major zones. There is the inland area, which basically predominantly deals with the historic district, with the actual nest of what makes this place really beautiful. And then the waterfront, which needs to not only respond to the context of the historic neighborhood, but also to what's happening to the north, BMCR, and also to the south, to the greater East River Esplanade Park, which is, if you think cohesively, this needs to be read as a continuous waterfront all the way from the south as you move up north. So this is one link that needs to be introduced into the waterfront experience. So we've come up, sorry, this is going to be a little faulty, so every now and then it's going to kind of jump. So we've come up with a series of design objectives, 5 of them to be specific, right? And what we would like to do is apply these design objectives to anything and everything that we do with the project. The first objective is to connect the neighborhood to the waterfront. That goes without saying. We don't want any disruptions. We want complete universal connectivity, or universal access between the streets of the historic district and the waterfront. This should actually be the first, protect and allow for the maximum land area possible to protect the entire neighborhood. And you will see that in our alignment, this line of protection moves all the way out to the edge of the waterfront, which is really important. The most out there the line of protection is, the more area protected we have for the neighborhood and for the waterfront. Integrating infrastructure with placemaking also goes without saying. This is New York City, and like many projects that you've already seen being built as we speak, there's a very conscious effort to integrate issues of urban design and landscape into the infrastructure that creates flood protection. So the integration is an integral part to the design objective. We would like to enhance the experience of the public realm. We don't think of the project as a disruption to the city, but we're looking at it as an opportunity to enhance that experience. And we don't have a choice but to protect our neighborhoods. So we're going to take a positive attitude and turn that into an opportunity for new forms of recreation for the city and for the neighborhood of Seaport in particular. And also we'll celebrate the character of the neighborhood itself, like through the relevation of historic relics, the usage of materials. As Elizabeth mentioned, we have been scanning the vernacular of the neighborhood, what makes this neighborhood special. Stones, bluestone, cobblestones, diamond plate, abutting all of this beautiful building entrances. The red brick, and that is also something, the materiality and the language that we hope to integrate into any form of placemaking opportunity that we have. And you will see a little bit of that, how that might shape up. But in essence, what we want to make sure is that we don't want to design something that looks like it belongs elsewhere. We want something that it is integrated with the vernacular of the architecture of the neighborhood. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the actual infrastructure toolkit. Some of you might be very familiar with how this works out. There are two kinds of infrastructure. There's the passive infrastructure mechanisms, which are the ones that we honestly prefer to work with. These are systems that are set in place, and they require very little maintenance and operations, and they provide us with more safety because they are fixed infrastructures. But because of issues of pedestrian mobility, vehicular mobility, and sometimes we have issues with the overpasses and the structures of the bridge, we have to also use infrastructures that are deployable, meaning like infrastructures that can get actually deployed or activated in the case of a major storm. And these are things that we have to do because we have no other option. We have to provide accessible communities for both the vehicle and the pedestrian. And so, but rest assured that we're trying our ultimate best to minimize the number of deployables, because we actually believe that the passive treatments can actually withhold for a long period of time. And in all honesty, they provide us with more placemaking opportunities for urban design and landscape treatments. So with that, the design approach, as you can probably imagine, is a combination of the flood barrier with the placemaking opportunity, which can take a number of different forms and shapes. And the good news is that that's what we're here to talk about tonight. If you kind of think about conceptually what we're doing, you will see that in a lot of the geography for the neighborhood, we have the beginnings of what the infrastructure might be like, how high it might be, how wide it might be. And what we're here to talk about is the opportunities that we have as a community, as designers, to put together ideas for the landscape and how we experience the street. And I think that's where the fun part, at least for us, the designers in the room. So, like I said, it's been a lot of work since we got here. We heard from you last time. We wanted to start by even in the way that we design the infrastructures, the raw infrastructures, how these passive walls get actually installed, how wide and how low. We heard you loud and clear about, protecting waterfront views is an important aspect. Integrate green infrastructure into whatever forms of placemaking and landscape treatments. Protect Imagination Playground. We've talked a lot about that, and we have some good news. We are protecting the playground, so that has become the basis of our design. Pedestrian and cyclist intersections. We have to keep our streets and our pedestrian movement safe. Provide ADA access and universal access everywhere. This is not a question of that we're being selective about. We want this to be a complete, maybe 20 years ago, we used to think about ADA and ramp access. Today, we're talking about universal access as a concept for placemaking, and that's something that we take very seriously. Multi-purpose infrastructure, as it goes without saying, what does this infrastructure do for me, for you, in terms of my experience on the street? In a lot of places for a social interaction and activity, right? We are not looking at these infrastructures as places or barriers, but more about opportunities to reconnect with the community in different forms of social activity. So that was just a few, what we believe were the most important. And then what we did to that is actually upgraded this, again, very conceptual design toolkit for placemaking. And so the way that it works, and by the way, if you didn't catch it this one time that I'm trying to explain it to you, there will be people in the back, like Elizabeth mentioned. There's going to be more people with the same amount of knowledge that I bring, explaining to you if something isn't clear. You'll have another opportunity to interact with people on the tables. They'll also be able to explain these things to you, but really it's a very simple concept. We have a passive treatment or a deployable treatment, which is the darker orange. And anything in and outside of that is the opportunity that we have to create something special for the streets or for the waterfront. The toolkit is somewhat organized by height. You will see that, I don't know if you remember that slide where Elizabeth mentioned the topographies. There are places in the neighborhood that are very, very low that would require a level of intervention that goes up to 6 feet in elevation. the lower the existing terrain, the higher the intervention needs to be. And so that's what that means, and also the width, the available width to actually play with what we have. In some cases, we have a very narrow channels where we have to be efficient about how wide we actually put our interventions in. In other places like the waterfront, we have the flexibility to really stretch terrain or surface design so that we can actually, along the way with this terrain, create even more programming opportunities for interaction and play. And again, all of this is going to come together as we talk to you in the back and also on the table if something isn't clear. So that's about the design process, right? Kind of tell you a little bit about how we're going to do this together. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the alignment itself, because that's the part that we've been working really hard to get to the place where we are today. Where on the street, which side, how high, how low, all of that. So something to keep in mind, and we really this is important to understand, right? Like, it's not necessarily like a free for all. We are trying to create as many opportunities as we can to interact with the place, to create beautiful environments. But there are a lot of hard constraints that we have to navigate, and these are those three of the major key considerations that we had to put into play in order to come up with the right flood alignment. Again, maximizing protected area. It's like, this is a flood protection project. So that's the main objective of the project. Enhancing everything that we have with universal access. We want everyone to have accessibility to anything and everything that we make, from the perspective of the pedestrian walking, view sheds, and all of that, and possibly even discover new ways of experiencing places like the waterfront, which we're kind of excited about, to be honest. And then the fact that we have to navigate existing infrastructures. There's the bridge, there's the FDR, there's vehicular mobility, like the fact that we have grading constraints where we have to pick up a lot of elevation as an existing before we put an infrastructure in place. So those things are really, really hard, and that's what our engineering team has worked really hard to kind of negotiate with all these considerations to come up with the best alignment and where geographically it needs to be placed. So here are some of those. Goes without saying, I can go through these quite quickly. Utility networks, as you know, subway grades, circulation and adjacent uses, where are the main entrances of buildings, whether we have narrow sidewalks or wider sidewalks, pedestrian access, universal access, obviously. In the waterfront, the constraints are a little bit different. We have a lot of, the FDR as a major protagonist on this play. We have subway tunnels, CSO outfalls. I mean, it's like how you weave that line of protection is really, really important, and you have to consider everything that's built in and around us and things that we don't see, which is like even more complicated than what we see. And then the adjacent planned projects, the City of New York, EDC, Parks Department, we've been working, and I say we because we have collaborated in other projects for a number of years to build a beautiful waterfront. So we don't want to throw any of that work away, and we want to build upon that and kind of tie back into that, including some of the resiliency projects that we're working on at the moment, such as BNCR. So here it is. That's generally where the alignment is. This is where the line of protection needs to move through. It is generally organized around heights, right? A solid line means a passive treatment. The good news is that most of it is passive, which is what we want. And every now and then, because of issues of vehicular connection or mobility, we have to have deployables, and we'll explain that to you if you want to learn more about that. But really, where there's a street, we have to cross it, and we'll have to get to that. There are generally three heights of interventions, three sets of interventions. There are interventions that go from 4 to 6 feet tall that generally happen in and around this area in the neighborhood, which is where the Imagination Playground is, where we have the lowest existing levels in the neighborhood, and as well as the waterfront. So that's where we have to have the much larger height of intervention. And then the orange represents a 2 to 4 feet tall of intervention, which then creates a different set of opportunities in how we navigate the flood protection. And then the yellow, it's from 0 to 2 feet. And that really happens when we're tying back into elevation 11, which is the objective of the project. We protect to elevation. And again, if you have any questions, if we're going too far, I mean, we went over this last time, this one in particular, but there's plenty of people in the room that can help clarify this if you need to. Okay. So here's another illustration that shows the design flood elevation. I think this is another concept that might be a little tricky to kind of understand, but again, there's more people. So we have a fixed barrier, which is the actual passive treatment that we're trying to get, generally speaking, from elevation 6 to elevation 11. And how we go by doing that, that's what we're here to talk about. And we've created a lot of tools to help have a really interesting conversation about that. And there's also the passive sill elevation, which is kind of an interesting concept, which means that we're going from elevation 6 to elevation 8.5 as a passive treatment, meaning that elevation is actually going to help protect us from tidal flooding to the years 2080s, which we're covered. You know what that means, guys? In concept, what that means is that as we start working on, say, for the next 10, 15 years on the financial master plan, the FIDI larger resiliency projects, we might never be able to deploy. We might never need to deploy because this sill is actually designed to protect us all the way for 2080s tidal flooding. Again, more information on that on the tables, but the good news is that we're designing almost like a bulletproof system that we might not even be able to deploy. We might not need to deploy by the time the other project comes around the bend. Generally speaking, where the height of intervention, how high the level of protection needs to be. This is another graphic that shows almost the same thing that I explained to you earlier. The darker shade of purple indicates the lower levels in the entire neighborhood. That's a generalized topographical map, but really, generally speaking, you go from an intervention that goes 1 feet, that moves around, goes to 5.5, then it goes back to 4, and then it meets an existing grade. So here's where the fun begins. We're here to present to you a pre-designed network, a framework. This is not a concept yet. This is the beginnings of ideas, and we've created tools for you to actually engage in the creation of what could happen in the neighborhood. So here's a preliminary alignment in plan diagram. As you know, we've decided to sort of like separate the project into 2 zones, the inland and the waterfront. And so with that, I'm going to go very quickly and explain to you how the inland alignments work. And what we've done is actually created 3 areas of focus for the inland alignment. We have one, the tie-in at the Titanic Memorial site. We have what we call area to Seaport streets, which is basically a streetscape treatment that the alignment needs to follow through. And then the imagination playground as a 3rd area of focus for the inland alignment. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those. Thank you. So for the Titanic Memorial, here's what we more or less have as an existing condition. There's a lot to keep in mind. We've had a lot of conversations about access, about history, about universality, about planting and all of those things. And what we've come up with is an alignment that doesn't come in the way of sort of impeding any of these beautiful moments that you experience on the Titanic Memorial, and allows for porosity in circulation where we have a small deployable. For example, at elevation 8.5, as you see, the grade is actually slightly raised to protect us to the 2080 storm surges. And we can explain that to you a little bit more, but the idea there is that we might not need to deploy. And keep it completely porous as it makes its turn into the rest of the Seaport streets with deployables that kind of make the bend around. So if you show the next slide, what happens outside of the actual flood wall is what we're here to talk about. There are width limitations with how wide the sidewalk is, where the bus stop is, whether we want places for people to sit. If you go to the next slide, please. Whether we want people to sit, whether we want planting to go along the edge. that we might be able to actually enhance the experience of the Titanic Memorial with a little bit of a green buffer around it, perhaps? Could it be a places to sit? Could it be a places to roll in a wheelchair, wait for the bus, et cetera, et cetera? The intervention is actually pretty minimal. Like there's not a whole lot happening, and that is done by design. We do not want to disturb too much of what's happening with Titanic Memorial and only address what is needed. And we're here to talk about what that could be, right? So go to the next slide, please. So we're going to move on to the next area of focus, and that is the streets, like particularly Fulton and Front streets as you navigate the alignment. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's an image of the existing conditions of what John Street looks like. Now we have two scenarios here for you for discussion. The first is a hybrid system, something that introduces a passive protection with a deployable protection on top of it. Because we don't want to block views, we want pedestrian safety to feel very open and airy. We are investigating this as an option. The overall height of intervention is only 4 feet in elevation. It's not that tall. So that's good news. And what we want to make it for this option, if we take down the deployable, it's only 2 feet in height, the intervention as total. So if you go to the next slide, so what could happen here, right? We've only taken, this is what we're calling it the pre-designed framework. So we're just looking at widths, we're looking at heights, we're looking at opportunities, and then what we're doing, thank you, you're doing really well, by the way, thank you. What we're then taking is we're going back to the design toolkit that we have, the placemaking toolkit, and look for what's the right width, what's the right height, and what's the right activity that could happen along the way. Is it a planter? Is it a double tier bleacher? Is it just a simple bench? It could be a number of other things, and that's what we're here to talk to you about, with giving you plenty of options. I'm not going to tell you what I think, not yet. So go to the next slide. And then what we have, a second option for the flood protection in the exact same place. We are testing something, we're not testing, that's the wrong word. We're doing something very similar at Battery Park City around the Jewish Memorial, the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And we have a combination, it's fully passive, which is good news, but it's a combination of a hardened structure with a glass topper for flood protection. So that's what we're kind of introducing here. So we don't have to have a deployable, but we have a glass topper for flood protection, which, there are limitations to how high you can go with those, which is why we're sort of setting the framework for that. But opportunities for that are also very, very different. For example, there might not be a much wider need for this infrastructure because it's a little bit more streamlined and compact, where you might have a linear planter or just a linear bench to go with a beautiful translucent glass wall. So again, these are things that we're here to talk to you about in terms of preferences, in terms of porosity, how much you want it to be able to see through and all of that. Give me a time check, by the way. So go to the next slide, please. So the third area of focus for the inland waterfront is the Imagination Playground. Plenty of discussions about how this is going to go down. But really, what we've managed to come away with, all of the work that we've done thus far, is that we are able to protect it if we go around the perimeter of the playground. Now, there will be implications about what that means. We have to provide universal access. There has to be great changes. There have to be opportunities for, opportunities, right? With the second you have to put a barrier and you have to connect point A to point B, what happens between the 2 points is where opportunities come. And I think that's what we're here to talk to you about. Go to the next slide, please. Here's an existing conditions with some of the existing grades about what that corner might look like. And then on to the next slide that shows the height of intervention. Remember what I told you earlier, in this area, it's actually like a little lower as existing elevation, which means that what we do is higher to get us to elevation 11. And so if you go to the next slide, again, framework, right? How to gradually we move from one elevation to another. How do we gonna go up into a ramp system or a gradual sort of treatments of plantings or seating? Could there be an opportunity for social gathering outside of the playground? It becomes the playground itself. And also this area here, which is, it has a lot of potential to be a place of destination. And right now it's like a little bit on the bare side. It's a great opportunity to create, I shouldn't say things like that. Don't get me in trouble. Did you record that? I should say things like that? Okay. But it's an opportunity, right? If we didn't have a flood protection project to deal with, we wouldn't be able to reimagine this plaza as a place of social connection. Go to the next slide. And then, as I mentioned, all the types of amenities that could happen. The design team will walk you through all of those nuances of what it could be, and then we can have a nice conversation about the future of this corner. Go to the next slide, please. And now we're switching.
Fulton Street?
Say what?
Did we miss Fulton Street?
No, we didn't. We just kind of went around.
Okay.
But we'll get more specific on the tables on that. All the questions that you want. We're going to move into the waterfront. We're going from inlet, and now just kind of like we are in the same neighborhood. We're dealing with historic sensitivities and vernacular and heritage and all of that, but the environment is very different. It's a very different situation. We have a waterfront that moves north-south for the most part. It's not like a fixed moment in Seaport. It's part of a cohesive linear waterfront that connects to BMCR, goes down south, and all of that stuff. And for that, we're showing you 3 other areas of focus that we would like for you to choose and sort of connect with. You want to talk about all of them? That's also up to you when it comes to the presentation, to the workshop sessions. So we have area 4, which is Pier 16 and 17. It's kind of a crucial moment where we make that connection from the streets onto the waterfront. And then we have the Jerry Driscoll waterfront, which is somewhat exposed away from the FDR, which is a good thing. We get a lot of sunlight there. And then we have the BMCR tie-in, which is more of a utility connector, which we're working with everyone, with DOT and EDC to figure out where is the best side of the street to tie into. And remember that corner, how we make that turn, it's a web of complexity. And so we have to take into account everything that happens above us, under us, the grade, and also how we would like people to move through the space and feel welcome into the waterfront. So go to the next slide. Here is area 4, Pier 16, 17, raw infrastructure. Next slide, please. An existing condition of what that is today. How the infrastructure will affect this area. It's more or less between 2 and 4 feet. If you go back, thank you. And what we're doing, we anticipate a lot of programming opportunities, a lot of places for gathering. It's the Seaport waterfront is highly active. So we don't want to come in a way of creating barriers as you move north-south, but we want a very sort of gradual change of topography from one side into the other. And what happens in the in-between is where the opportunities lie. And places, it could be places where you have a planter bench, on the one side could be a bleacher, on the other side could be a planter, universal access, navigating the 2 sides of the infrastructure very seamlessly. We don't want it to be like just a ramp on one side of the wall, but we want to create an environment that it's almost like you almost don't notice that there is a wall. That's kind of what we want to come away with the design. And so on and so forth. Then moving into area 5 with the waterfront, Jerry Driscoll waterfront. An incredible amount of incredible opportunity here in this area. If you move on to the next slide. Here's more or less, the temporary barriers. Here are some of the existing conditions. It's kind of like dark and it wants attention. It wants to be revitalized. If you go to the next slide. The intervention here is high in compared to other places. We have to go up to 6 feet in elevation all the way to the edge. Remember, we're trying to protect the most. So we want to put that line of protection in the outermost available area that we can. That's what we're doing. And so how we do that, and here is the opportunity. So when we think about grade change, we don't think any longer about we are in point A and then we move it to point B by going up a stairs or going up a ramp. We would like to create an environment that is completely seamless, that the elevations are very gradual from a higher elevation into an existing elevation and create opportunities for activation along the way. And so we are very fortunate that we actually have the width to create programming opportunities that would actually enhance the experience of the waterfront by bringing new view sheds that you've never seen before, because somehow we're now elevated slightly, gradually. So if you look at it from far, right, we're trying to give you a framework so that you can imagine that standing on existing grade, and as you move up, it feels like a very gradual ascension rather than something abrupt, which we don't have to have. Go to the next slide. And again, opportunities here are endless, and that's what we're here to talk to you about. And we brought a bunch of cards with activities that can actually happen along the waterfront. You'll be able to craft your experience, and we'll be able to talk about it at the end of the workshop. Universal access, critical for this. We don't want to sort of create places for ramps or places for, everything should be seamlessly accessible. Kind of similar to what we're doing with Battery Park City South, where, there is no real hard line between different levels on that park. That's what we're trying to do here as well. So with that, I think I've given you a lot already to think about. If you go to the next slide. Just one last moment along the same Geritor's Cove waterfront. This is the sort of like a kind of sad conditions. I shouldn't say things like that, but it's what we have, and we're going to make this a better waterfront, which is great. And so we have this height of intervention that we have to raise this entire topography up to. And when we do that, we create a cohesive, uplifted waterfront that is connected to existing grade very gradually as you move away from it into the city. And again, lots of opportunities for shade, opportunities for pedestrian connectivity as you move from one elevation to the other, and then seamlessly connect circulation in a way that doesn't feel forced ever. So that's another thing that we are trying to do. Next slide, please. And then finally, this one, you might think it's kind of like a more utilitarian, but it's one of the most complicated things that we're trying to figure out, because we have to get down. The Get Down is a project that has recently been completed, and we want to integrate that feature into our project. So we're doing a lot of gymnastics, right, to get from one elevation to the sixth elevation and still be able to get to the Get Down, which is the Manhattan Beach, which is it's pretty cool. It's a place where you can actually touch water if you want to. So, but how the infrastructure gets installed and how we then have to add places of activity and pedestrian use, it's challenging. So we come out with this. Here's a little bit of what it looks like today with the Get Down into the beach. Go to the next. Here's the height of intervention, and trust us that this is the best place that we can install it so that we can have access to all these things. Then again, the beginnings of great change. If you go to the next slide, that'd be great. Like, for example, universal access along the waterfront with gradual descensions from one elevation to the other that get you all the way to the beach. We have a couple of deployables at elevation 8.5, which is the safe elevation. We have to have vehicular access for emergency uses and stuff. So we found a route to get us in and out of there without disturbing the edge. We prioritize people's experience. And I know that, there are emergencies sometimes and we have to get cars and stuff. But the way that we're thinking about this framework is that prioritizes the experience of the everyday user and not necessarily an emergency corridor. Sometimes people get a little too carried away with putting emergency lanes on everything. It will be safe, but she's laughing because we've been fighting this one out internally. So with that, where we are today, community workshop number 2. This is where we talk about ideas and activation. And as you can see, there's a lot of 3D. It's 3-dimensional. This project is very 3-dimensional. So we're here to talk about ideas. And then we have another meeting with the Community Board 1 to talk more specifically about issues of the environment and a design progress based on the conversation that we'll have today, right? We have a month to kind of get things started with the development of the design. In the spring, big things are happening. We're going to continue to talk about ideas. We'll be showing you the beginnings of how these things will start to get rendered. And also, we'll come back to you in a similar setting with a third workshop where we're going to be presenting the updated design, hopefully with actual places to sit and hopefully a little bit of planting, and receive your feedback to continue to fine tune, the development of the project. So it's a really exciting time. It's the beginning of the design process, and I think that you'll be hopefully happy where we are today. But I shouldn't get ahead. Okay. So this information is available too. You can scan a barcode, and every member of the team, if you want to have a phone number or an email or a project website, we can provide it to you, so that you always continue to give us feedback and advice on the project. Thank you.